Dong from our Vietnamese side. Welcome. We have Max Kuipers, who created a global database, data visual. Welcome. And where do we have more? So keep on asking your questions about technique, because better to do it now, and then as soon as we start, then you are a pro already in the system. That if you have technical questions on how Zoom and Quaqua work together, then you can ask them to us or to Marcin. Marcin is the specialist in it. He's from Bellet and Bellet, the translation bureau. And we have on our side, let's say wage indicator side, we have two firemen. That is Niels Peugen and it's Akash Botra. They two have been doing all our webinars over the last, I think, half a year. They become real pros in how to get the system up and running all the time. So that works also great. And maybe Jana, because you will almost start talking. What was the most, let's say, the coolest of this project?
The coolest part of the project, I think, well, I'm going to be very biased, but I think the coolest part was that we found a way to code wages, because we did a project before this called Barcom, and there we really had a hard time making wages comparable across countries, because pay scales in different countries looked so very different. And so we tested out a new system here looking at the highest and the lowest wages. And I think that worked really well. So for me, that was definitely the coolest thing.
Okay, thanks, cool.
And of course, working with you, Pauline. Second coolest thing.
Well, but this is a big team, as we can show here, because it's not only University of Amsterdam, it's University of Pisa, it's CNEL, it's Solidarność, it's CCOO, it's CELSI, it's Wage Indicator. We have people, well, Industrial is not a team, but we discussed some issues to team up on the way on the database. So it's a quite impressive full team, I would say. And whoa. And there is somebody from Milan. Yes. I would say we have another 2 minutes to to familiarize, and then we formally start. Then all unmute. We start with a very short video, and after the video, I will do a formal welcome. And after the formal welcome, we have the presentation from Jana Besamuska. And then we go in the breakout rooms, and then you're among each other as Dutch, Italian, Spanish. And the Vassygrad countries is a different case, because they will be in the main room with a couple of languages and all the interpreters. Meanwhile, Marcin is Spanish translation will work from 2:30 sharp. So that is in 1 minute. And we have a live stream of this. Well, as long as we have this show, you can see this as well. Then I would say something the last minute about it, because we have two panels, and one is about collective agreements on European level. The other one is about machine learning. That panel starts at 4 o'clock. That's a panel which is, I assume, a bit more technical. And it might be that all 200 people who registered for this conference, that they all want to go to this panel, but we assume not. The panel will be in English, and we have that panel as long as we think it's nice, cool, interesting. So you're all invited, because that is about speeding up collective agreements in databases. It's technical, but it's also fun. So you can stay after 4. You're very much invited to stay after 4 o'clock or 4 o'clock Central European time. But it's not. We can understand that not all of you will do that. And okay, I think we start. the Goldberg conference starts now. Niels, can you show us the first wrap-up of the video? Let's say the first small video which Rogerio made for us to give a quick snapshot in what is the conference or what is the Goldberg project about. Voila.
Collective bargaining is key for wage setting and improving working conditions. Successful bargaining leads to collective agreements, but what is in them, not many people know. The Goldberg Europe project means to improve the knowledge of collective bargaining agreements. Researchers have analyzed over 600 collective agreements from 28 countries, including 25 EU member states and 2 associate countries. The research had 5 objectives. 1. Which topics are agreed upon in the agreements? And can patterns in those topics be identified? Recurring patterns within and across countries and private and public sectors. 2. Do agreements include wage clauses, pay scales and indexation clauses? How do pay scales compare within and across countries and sectors? 3. To what extent is a wider bargaining agenda agreed upon? Are clauses traded off against one another? 4. Do agreements converge across countries when concluded by daughters of multinational companies? Do these align with transnational agreements? 5. How feasible is a continuous Europe-wide data compilation of collective agreements? The collective agreements researched covered the public sector and the commerce, manufacturing and construction industries. The Goldberg project has improved our knowledge about industrial relations, social dialogue and the contents of collective agreements. Meanwhile, Wage Indicator compiled a huge database. It contains all collective agreements which are annotated for easy retrieval of clauses. Future analyses will also benefit from the machine learning models that are being developed for these collective agreements. In such ways, the Goldberg project will promote research on collective agreements in Europe for years to come.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you for sharing the video. I think we are now, really starting. Welcome. Welcome to the conference, Goldberg conference. My name is Pauline Osse. I'm Director, Wage Indicator, and I will be your MC today. In this conference, we focus only on collective agreements in the EU, but also Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Turkey. Over the last 2 years, we collected an extra 600 collective agreements in the manufacturing, construction, commerce, and public sector. Just to understand exactly what it makes to making a collective agreement tick. Today, we welcome you in a conference with more than 225 people at the moment, 37 countries, of which 14 European so far, as we know. And there will be 6 speakers, 17 panelists, 4 breakout rooms, and 2 panels, and that all in, let's say, 1.5 to 2 hours. We will run 7 languages. Our Zoom firemen Akash Botra and Niels Peugen, and the ballot interpreters will guide you. Questions, comments, use ongoing the chat box, as you already have seen and do. And the speakers and the first panel about the collective agreements and European level will have translation. That's till 4 p.m. Central European time. The second panel on machine learning is only in English, and it has no time limit. We talk until we think it's done. We can take decisions. We know how to make new steps. And we hope the program is short and snappy. videos, speakers, breakout rooms, and visuals. And we allow you to speak in the breakout rooms. The Italians, the Spanish, and Dutch can speak about their own collective agreements in their own language. No translations. In the Vassygrad group, they will stay in the main room with translation in English, in Polish, Hungarian, and Slovak. During the panels, you can speak up if the moderators allow you. You can always use the chat box to ask your questions. This program, the COWA conference as well, is made possible by the EU, by the University of Amsterdam, and absolutely a fleet of organizations and people. The conference is basically the result of many reports, videos, visuals over the last couple of years. Since this is a European project, we focus on Europe. But as a courtesy to the world, we give you a tiny snapshot of what we also bring for the world. And Niels, can you share quickly the screen of the visual, the global visual? Can you do that? I think so. It's not yet coming. If not, I can try and share the screen. Yeah, it's coming. Then this CBA, let's say this shows you that in general, we are in 62 countries around the world. So including West Africa, East Africa, in Asia, Latin America. And that learned us a hell of a lot. The database has now an extra feature. It allows you to go from global to any region in the world. From whatever region in the world, zoom in and find your collective agreements and select which one is the best. That's the trick. We can this is now on screenshot, and from next week on, it will work. So anyone who comes to the sites can quickly check and say, this is cool, we need to know more. And then obviously in the database, text CBAs are full text there, so you can understand them, see them. And we can go back to our normal screen, so stop sharing. Because now we will give the floor to Jana Bissemuska, University of Amsterdam. Jana will present in English. Pick your language, because now it's the first time we will see the real trick of the translation will work for the Polish, the Slovak, the Hungarian, the Italian, the Spanish, and the Dutch. So Jana, share your, or Niels will share your presentation, I'm quite sure, and select your language and enjoy. I will stay around. Anytime there is an issue, you know where we can find you, and you can find me in the chat box. Good luck. Good luck, Jana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline, and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to present some of the work we've done here on wages in collective agreements. And let me jump straight to the next slide. So wage fixing and collective bargaining is part of the core of the functioning of the social dialogue. And it's probably one of the first things that you think about when you think about collective bargaining. So through collective bargaining, we can fix wages or wage floors for employees covered by a collective agreement. And actually the impact may actually be even larger, especially in cases in countries where extension clauses exist. So where the wages agreed in collective agreements are extended to all employees in a sector, or if other measures like the minimum wage are linked to the development of bargained wages, like is in the case in the Netherlands. Next slide. And there's actually surprisingly little that we know about what's in collective agreements about wages, despite how important this entire issue is. The actual text of collective agreements are rather a black box. And so we still wonder things like, how do collective agreements actually fix pay? And do they include wages? And if so, are these wage floors or pay scales? And how are these pay scales structured? And importantly, at what level are these collectively bargained wages set? Next slide. So in COBRA Europe, we looked at 602 collective bargaining agreements in Europe, which come from the construction sector, manufacturing, commerce, and the public sector. And the first thing we notice is that actually 97% of these collective bargaining agreements have at least one clause about wages. About a third actually fixed a wage floor, and 14% include the statutory minimum wage. Next slide. So the first thing we ask about is, what do these collective agreements say about the places where wages are determined? And we find that 28% of these collective bargaining agreements leave wages to individual contracts, whereas a quarter fixes wages at the company level and 40% at the sector level. Then importantly, 65% of collective bargaining agreements that we studied in this project included pay scales. Next slide. There are actually quite large differences between countries, sectors, and level of bargaining in terms of the inclusion of pay scales. So for example, over 80% of the collective bargaining agreements that we studied in Portugal, Switzerland, Poland, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and Austria contained pay scales. On the other hand, fewer than 20% of the agreements in Romania, the UK, Denmark, and Serbia did. And this is not to say that those agreements don't set or fix any wages, because it's quite common to fix just a wage floor. However, in these countries, we didn't find a lot of full buildings of pay scales, so to say. Next slide. We also find differences across sectors, finding that in the 4 sectors we studied, we most often found pay scales in the manufacturing collective bargaining agreements and least often in the public sector. And finally, looking at the level of bargaining, multi-employer collective bargaining agreements, and these are agreements that usually cover an entire sector or subsector, actually much more often contained pay scales than single employer collective bargaining agreements did, or so company agreements. Next slide. And so when an agreement formulates an entire pay scale, that means they also have to set different wages for different groups of workers. And most often, collective bargaining agreements that we studied did so by differentiating by job title or occupation. So if you work in a different job, you'll get the wage associated with that job. Other common distinctions that we found across the collective bargaining agreements were age, which were often youth minimum wage scales, subsector of economic activity, skill level, groups of worker, or tenure at the company. Next slide. Now, the next way that collective bargaining agreements can affect wages is by increasing them. And so we asked how many of these agreements actually include negotiated wage increases. And we found that 13% contained a structural wage increase. A quarter actually only included a wage increase that was a once-only payment, and 37% contained a combination of both. However, 23% of the company and sector level agreements that we studied contained neither, so did not contain any wage increases. Next slide. So when we look at wage increases, though, and look at these 395 agreements out of the 602 that contained a wage increase, we looked at how they do this. And about 2/3 fixed wage increases by a percentage increase. So let's say from the 1st of January, we all earn 3% more. The other third did something else. 12% increased the wages by a fixed amount. So for example, by the 1st of January, we all earn €100 more per month, and 21% did both. And that means that this last third, 33% of these agreements actually increased wages in a way that compresses wage inequality within the sector, simply because the fixed amount by which the wages increase is a larger percentage of wages at the bottom than at the top. Next slide. And finally, of course, we wanted to know the answer to a very crucial question. are collectively bargained wages decent wages? Are they living wages? And the European Union considers people to be at risk of poverty if they earn less than 60% of the median wage in their country. And so what we did is we compared the lowest pay scale that was agreed for adult workers in collective bargaining agreements. And we took the average of that for each country, compared it to the at risk of poverty thresholds. What we found is, on average, the lowest pay scales were negotiated above the poverty threshold for a single person. And that is to say, if you work in Europe in the lowest pay scale of your CBA, you likely earn enough to make a living for yourself. However, we also found that this was rarely the case for workers with a family. So the lowest collectively bargained wages rarely met the threshold for staying out of poverty for a family of 2 adults and 2 children. And so that is something that perhaps there is still work to be done. Thank you very much. Pauline, you're still muted.
Thank you very much. There are some questions, and I suggest that these questions, Jana, that you will just start answering them in the chat box. In the meantime,
absolutely perfect. Yeah,
we will do the nice trick of moving people to the breakout rooms. We have a couple of breakout rooms. We explain a bit about that. There is a Dutch one, there is an Italian one, there is a Spanish one. These 3 breakout rooms, most of the people will go automatically to these breakout rooms. In these breakout rooms, you can speak your own language. You will find people from your own country and from your own collective agreements. If you want to hear Dutch, but you don't speak Dutch, well, then we should talk with you after the conference, but during the conference, it's only Dutch. We think that's more easy. For the Vassygrad countries, which is Hungarian, Hungary, Slovak, Poland, they they stay in the room as where they are now. So basically they don't do anything. The translators for these languages, they will help you out, which means that you can either, when you're Hungarian, you can hear the Polish, or you can hear the Slovak. So thank God, it's affordable for you to hear everything. Ideally, we should see people now moving already to the correct rooms. Is that true, Akash?
Yeah, I'm just opening the rooms. You have the option to choose the room in case you haven't registered or you just got a link right now. So you can choose the room. We have Spain, Netherlands, and Italy. In case you aren't in any of those 3 regions, kindly stay in the main room. And I'm opening up the room. So if there's any issues, just let us know. Okay,
good. And you can choose the room down under in the system. And as it is with Zoom, if you still have your phone on or television or the dogs are barking, then unmute or mute yourself and make sure that it's all a bit silent. So I still see a lot of Italians. Are they still not in their own room, or is still a lot of Spanish as well? Are they not yet in their correct rooms?
We'll take a minute or 2 to transition. So
okay, and then let me explain already. In the Italian room, we have Valeria Tonella, she's the moderator, and Armanda Cetrullo, she's the presenter. So welcome in the Italian room. In the Spanish room, we have as a moderator, Daniela Chacon, and the presenter is Gabriela Medas. And among Carles, we have a couple of collective agreement specialists from Spain. That is the Spanish room. The Dutch room, we have so Pim from FNV, Dutch Confederation of Trade Unions, so Maurits Harteveld from the Employers Organization, AVVN, I would say, in this case. And the presenter is Niels Janssen, lawyer from University of Amsterdam, for the Dutch room. And And then we should be among each other in the main room with the Vassygrad countries. This might cause a small little problem for those who don't master any of these languages or don't feel related to any of these countries. In this case, I would suggest enjoy the Vassygrad group, because that's at least translated into English. And if not, we always can chat in the chat box together. This breakout room session is for half an hour sharp. And after the half an hour, we will start with more an overview of what is in the collective agreements in Europe. Kea Tijnens will do that presentation, and right after we have that big panel on a European improvement of collective agreement systems. So let me know if there is an issue. I see step by step people are disappearing to the right rooms. But there's still 100 people. Yeah?
Hi, it's Silvia Bianco from Fairware Foundation. I wanted to join the Italian room, but I don't have, in the main bar, I don't have the breakout room option. I'm not sure why.
Then let me see, that might be, I would say, Niels, can you explain her in the private or in the chat box? So can you make yourself visible in the chat box with your name and then select it? Because I'm afraid it has to do with an update of Zoom. That might be, but I'm not sure. So can you sort it out with Niels? Maria, do you have a question? No?
No, I just wanted to say hi.
Yes. How are you doing? You're in Geneva at the moment.
Yes.
And the weather is good.
Yep, beautiful.
Well, same here in Amsterdam. Welcome. So Akash, you're doing good with your breakout rooms?
Yeah, I am. Someone chose to shut it down, so I'm opening it up again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because it feels that we still have a hell of a lot of people in the main room. That might be because the Vassygrad countries is together. It's anyway a big group.
I'm still here also, so I need to see the breakout room.
Yeah, I assume we are all having the same problem, that we don't see the option to join the room.
If I can help, you go on to more. If you see it like me, there is more options at the right, and inside the more options you can see breakout rooms.
Yeah, no, we don't have that. Maybe it's a Zoom, a version of Zoom that we have that doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that more option.
It looks like 3 dots. There's just 3 plain dots.
Yeah.
Like ellipses. And if you click on that, you'll get the breakout room option, and then you can
Yeah, no, it's not there.
Okay. Let's sort out.
Oh, okay. Now I think we've been invited by the host, so that's great.
Cool. Then, so I assume we're quite close to having in the main room only people from the Vassygrad countries, and then the Dutch, the Italian, and the Spanish can do what they want on their way.
Sorry, okay? Pauline, I'm having issues with at least 3 people who are trying to enter the Spanish room. So is it correct if I go in the room, then I can take people in? Can I do that?
Akash?
Manually?
Or Niels?
No, you can't.
Okay.
I think Akash, you have to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Akash, watch out, because the breakout rooms will close in 20 seconds again.
Yeah, that's the main issue, that I'm turning on the breakout room and someone is shutting it down.
Mm-hmm. Who's doing that?
I don't know.
Please do not click on close breakout rooms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Feel invited to this circus, huh? because this is it's quite complex. It also relates to the fact that Zoom has different updates, and now and then not everybody has the same proper update. And in other times, in other conferences, we were playing music and videos during.
Vassygrad countries in the main room. So this is not a breakout room. I'm just seeing the question. So if you want the Vassygrad presentation, you can stay with us. We are just waiting for the other people who are not interested to leave.
The breakout room is open. Just click on the 3 ellipses, choose your room. If you're not in the Vassygrad, then choose room. Otherwise, stay with us and enjoy.
Okay, I see that being a co-host, I can send people to rooms. So I'm doing it for the people who are writing in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for helping me.
Can you do for me also? Because I still cannot be in the Italian room.
I have a problem. Pauline, can you hear me? Pauline? Hello?
I can hear you.
Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Marcin. My problem is that I don't see my name on... my możemy mówić po polsku. Nie widzę swojego imienia na żadnej z list.
I to jest dobrze, dlatego że uczestnicy Grupy Wyszehradzkiej nie przechodzą do breakout roomu, tylko zostają w tej głównym miejscu, gdzie się spotykamy. Dlatego to nie jest grupa. Ewentualnie może Pani znaleźć swoje imię w tym wypadku wśród tych osób, które są podpisane jako unassigned, czyli nie przypisane do żadnego pokoju spotkań, tylko pozostają w tym głównym pomieszczeniu.
Danusia, gdzie ty chciałaś iść? Do jakiego pokoju? Zostań z nami głównym.
Can we start the Vassygrad section already?
I think so.
I think we should.
Okay, so while there are still some participants who will be joining other breakout rooms, I would already like to open the Vassygrad room, which will focus on the analysis of collective agreements in Poland, Slovakia, Czechia, and Hungary. My name is Marta Kahancová, and I will be your moderator today. Let me welcome all participants, and in particular, our speaker, Gabor Sudi from the Central European Labor Studies Institute, as well as 4 panelists who are experts or directly negotiating collective agreements. And this is Mrs. Monika Benedeková from Slovakia, Mrs. Alena Paukertová from Czechia, Mrs. Danuta Vojdat from Poland, and Mr. Kártyár Gábor from Hungary. I'm giving the word to Gabor Sudi to introduce the findings of the Vassygrad analysis. Gabor, please.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Niels. If you would start my presentation, I would be thankful. So we have quite a short time, so I would try to go through it as thoroughly as possible. As you may know, that we have made analysis of all 4 Vassygrad countries about collective bargaining, And my main question of the presentation is the same path or some different trajectories? And I don't want to keep you in suspense any longer that I say it at the beginning that it's basically mostly the same path, but we can see some significant differences also in some topics in collective bargaining among the countries, which I would like to highlight in some short slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the similarities in background conditions, I think, are well known to people. After the socialist era, in all four countries, more or less similar collective bargaining system have developed, which are characterized by decentralization of the main actors and the horizontally and vertically not well coordinated system. And what we see in all countries is the eroding power of the trade unions, which also affects the impact of collective bargaining and working conditions, which is slowly but steadily declining. You can see also in the decline of higher level bargaining, which I would say is only really functioning in Slovakia, but it's also getting worse in time. And there are official databases, this I have to mention, in all countries, but they are very limited to use. So the next slide, please, Niels. So as you can see from the next slide, because of this, that we cannot rely on really good functioning databases like in other countries, like in the Netherlands, we managed to get 40 agreements, 10 of each countries, but it's quite biased towards public and the commerce sector. So more than 30 collective agreements are from there, and we have quite few construction and manufacturing in our sample, which is, as I say again, because we cannot use such a well-developed database, like, for example, in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. And so this is a very important slide. I would say that what is the mostly in all the countries in the agreement? One way, it's wages. In some way, in Hungary, for example, it's mostly supplements. So I don't say that what extent are their wages, but wages are covered there. As far as clauses and working hours, social security and pensions, or medical assistance and health and safety policies. And what are not there for various reasons are, for example, trial periods, which are, of course, regulated by other law and other binding legal acts, but it's still not there. As far as training options are not there, for example, or job descriptions or job classifications are not really featured in collective agreements or just very superficially. As well as clauses on maternity and paternity leave, I would say it in a broader sense. So, for example, all clauses that would ensure a better work-life balance for employees, like, for example, also childcare facilities are not really covered in collective agreements in the region. And least featured are clauses on equality, gender equality, and violence. The next slide, please. Now I will come to, yes, I will come to, you see, different interesting topics that I would like to feature. This is the level of wage determination, which you can see that mostly it's on company level. I would like to highlight that Poland seems to be an outlier in our sample, which can be attributed to the fact that there are more private companies in the Polish sample than in the other Visegrad countries. But you can see that 7 out of 10 Polish employees have wage determined at an individual contract level, which is not really visible in other countries. Next slide, please, Niels. And the wage premiums. So there can be more wage premiums, of course, in one collective agreement. And you can see that the most likely is evening or night work and overtime work, which are compensated a little bit more than 100%. If I have to say some number, like 125% of the average hourly or monthly wage. And here you can see also the country differences, which are quite evenly balanced out. Next slide, please. So the working hours. Here I have to say that if you look at it, so the blue one is the blue one is the 40 hours, which seems to be in Poland the main, and also in other countries. Here I would also say, let's check the second column of Hungary, which seems to be an outlier, that this is the only country where we didn't find such collective agreements in our database which have less than 40 hours. So Hungarians collective agreement seems to lay down the longest working hours. And also just as a side remark, also seems to stipulate the longest overtime hours, which can be also attributed, as I described it in the report, to labor code regulations. The next slide, please. Job classification system, as far as I said, except for Poland, it's really not seems to be a real issue there. And for Poland, it can be that it's because of that we have here more private companies from the commerce and manufacturing sector. Otherwise, it seems so that it's not really there. The next one, please. Getting to the end. So yes, you can see the work. Is it the working hours again? So I think that we should go to the other direction. We went back. So the next slides will be about health. Oh, sorry, social security and pension funds. We have checked 3 spans, and you can see that pension funds are the most uptaken in the region, while the other 2 unemployment and disability funds are absolutely not there. And here again, the outlier is Hungary, where the second pillar of pension is already not functioning, and also seems that the third pillar of voluntary is also not really that much used as in other 3 countries. Okay, next one, please. Yes, the health and safety policy. Here I have to check that you see that again we can see that most of the countries have it, except for Hungary, where it's 6 doesn't have it, and Slovakia is here the best, where 7 out of 10 collective agreements have an explicit health and safety policy, while in the other countries it's rather just an indirect mentioning of it, like in Hungary it's not mentioned at all. This is also, I think, quite a main difference. And the last slide, please. The last slide is about, as far as I said, this is one of the topics that are really not there. If we are really gracious, that we say that we take everything into account, so all generic mentioning or all mentioning to laws, you can see that it's still only the Czech Republic where the majority of the CBAs mention equality or violence. So on the last slide is just, I would like to thank you for checking, being with us. And if you want to check more in detail the report, then here is the link for it. And please, I would give back the floor to Marta to lead the panel discussion now.
Thank you, Gabor, for this interesting insight. I would now welcome the 4 panelists to turn on their cameras and their microphones, and for everyone else to turn off your microphone. You are all invited to place your questions in writing in the chat box, and if there is time available at the end, we would be happy to respond to them. As you have seen from the presentation, the COBA project delivered quite a unique analysis. It is based on a collection and empiric and electronic coding of collective agreements across a number of countries. Besides discussing the content of these agreements, our panel discussion will focus more on why is it good to have such a database? Who can work with it? How can negotiators use it? Some of you on the panel are actually directly involved in negotiating collective agreements. So I would like to ask you whether you are in fact consulting other collective agreements when you lead your negotiations, whether this source of data or seeing provisions from other agreements is relevant for you in some way. I would first like to invite Mrs. Monika Benedekova, who is the chief negotiator of sectoral trade union OZKO in Slovakia. Monika, please.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, verím, že sa počujeme. Ja by som teda sa venovala, viem, že máme limitovaný čas, takže priamo budem sa teda venovať otázke. Samozrejme, že pri príprave obsahu kolektívnych zmluv je úplne jedno, či je to úroveň podniková alebo úroveň sektorová, vždy robíme určité porovnania. V rámci OZKOVO a sektorov, ktoré zastupujeme my ako odborový zväz KOVO, robíme porovnania aj interné, to znamená svojich podnikových kolektívnych zmluv a snažíme sa cez rôzne dotazníky zisťovať vlastne trendy a také tendencie, ktoré sú v podnikových kolektívnych zmluvách a vôbec teda na podnikovej úrovni. Vyhodnocujeme si každoročne tieto dotazníky a vlastne tak sme okrem iného napríklad zistili, že už viac ako 85% podnikov, kde pôsobíme, má napríklad v podnikových kolektívnych zmluvách pracovný čas upravený v nižšom rozsahu, ako je zákonný 40-hodinový pracovný čas. Takisto samozrejme využívame komparácie aj na odvetvovej úrovni. Tam je to jednoduchšie v tom, že na Slovensku stále je verejne dostupná táto databáza na stránke Ministerstva práce, sociálnych vecí a teda k obsahu aktuálnych sektorových kolektívnych zmluv sa vieme dostať a vieme si teda tie obsahy nejakým spôsobom komparovať, porovnávať, čerpať z nich inšpiráciu. Vzhľadom na to, že Slovensko stále aj kvôli teda tej neexistujúcej jazykovej bariére má blízko k českým kolegom a teda k českým nejakým kolektívnym zmluvám, snažíme sa čerpať inšpiráciu aj teda porovnávaním s českými kolektívnymi zmluvami, hlavne tými sektorovými, ku ktorými takisto máme prístup. Problémom teda naozaj je, pokiaľ ide o podnikovú úroveň, celkové tá dostupnosť k podnikovým kolektívnym zmluvám, pretože tie z rôznych dôvodov sú nedostupné. Bolo to spomínané teda aj v správe, aj v prezentácii. Toto je problém. Napriek tomu my sa snažíme v rámci nášho interného prostredia a myslím si, že zhruba tých 70-80% podnikových kolektívnych zmluv máme my v rámci interných zdrojov k dispozícii. Takže v každom prípade odpoveď na tú otázku je krátka, je jednoduchá, jednoznačne je veľmi inšpirujúce, je veľmi potrebné a pre nás aj veľmi poučné poznať niektoré úpravy, ktoré sú aj v iných krajinách, prípadne v iných odvetviach v kolektívnych zmluvách.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so the issue of access to collective agreements has been raised several times. I wonder how do Polish colleagues see this problem and whether it is beneficial for them to have access to such an international database. Ms. Danuta Wojdak, please. Your microphone is muted. You have to unmute your microphone. Okay, now it's fine. But we still cannot hear you.
Dobrze. Podejrzewam, że problem polega na tym, że... A teraz już jest? Teraz już jest? Okej. Problem polega na tym, że jak słucham na słuchawkach, to z jakiegoś powodu wyłącza mi się mikrofon. Nie mam pojęcia dlaczego, ale już wiem, na czym polega problem, więc będę unikać tej sytuacji. W Polsce mamy niezwykle zdecentralizowany system, jeżeli chodzi o możliwości negocjowania układów zbiorowych. To wynika z naszej przeszłości i tego, w jaki sposób kształtował się system relacji między wolnymi związkami zawodowymi a pracodawcami, gdzie na początku pracodawcą był szef zakładu pracy, poszczególnego konkretnego miejsca pracy. Słucham? I w momencie, kiedy rynek pracy zaczął się zmieniać, na przykład poprzez to, że zaczęły wchodzić firmy ponadnarodowe, których centrum decyzyjne było gdzie indziej, nie w danym zakładzie pracy, tylko na poziomie kraju czy na poziomie europejskim, nasza możliwość działania nie bardzo się tutaj zmieniła. I dlatego na poziomie zakładowym przede wszystkim negocjujemy, co ogranicza nasze możliwości wpływania na sytuację na przykład w całych sieciach. W Polsce nie ma, z tego co mi wiadomo, z tego co mi powiedziano ostatnio, ani jednego układu zbiorowego w sieciach ponadnarodowych handlowych na przykład, ponieważ pracodawcy nie życzą sobie negocjacji na poziomie, który ustalałby jednolite warunki pracy dla wszystkich pracowników w Polsce w danej sieci, czy to będzie Lidl, czy to będzie Jeronimo Marquez. W związku z tym pewne rzeczy można wynegocjować na poziomie sklepu, ale nie ma tych negocjacji na wyższym poziomie. Nie ma w Polsce również układów sektorowych. a przynajmniej jest ich no, na tyle niewiele, że nie można mówić o jakimś sensownym rozwiązaniu warunków na rynku pracy poprzez regulację sytuacji w poszczególnych sektorach. W prezentacji Gabora było widać, że w Polsce są dwa chyba układy sektorowe w sektorze publicznym, który jest w większej swojej części w dalszym ciągu państwowy i dlatego na poziomie krajowym można jakieś negocjacje prowadzić. Są propozycje pracodawców, którzy twierdzą, że owszem, wejdą do negocjacji na poziomie sektorowym, ale warunkują to na przykład wyłączeniem pewnych zapisów z kodeksu pracy. Ale my chcemy, żeby była pewność, że wobec tego będzie możliwość negocjowania tych obszarów w sektorowych układach zbiorowych i tutaj tej pewności niestety nie ma. Także to jest ten problem i powodem, dla którego jest tak duże zdecentralizowanie układów zbiorowych, jest to, że pracodawcy wykazują wyjątkową niechęć do negocjowania na tym poziomie. A jeszcze jeden problem, i już to jest moje ostatnie słowo, ponieważ te umowy, te porozumienia są na poziomie poszczególnych zakładów pracy, to nie ma możliwości w zasadzie porównania tego, co jest wynegocjowane w Krakowie i tego, co jest w Warszawie, z tym, co jest wynegocjowane w Gdańsku. Więc wasza baza danych, to, co w tej chwili powstaje, jest niezwykle cennym instrumentem i możliwością porównywania sytuacji, która jest w poszczególnych miejscach. I to, myślę, na ten moment wszystko z mojej strony.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Voigtländer. So you raised another important issue, which is the huge diversity of these agreements and a lack of transparency in access to them. So we hope that this electronic database will contribute to solve some of these issues. And now I would like to ask the Czech expert, Mrs. Paukertová, where do you actually see the benefit, or how can you use this type of an agreement? Maybe you can bring in some examples from the real life to us academics. Thank you. The floor is yours, Mrs. Paukertová.
So good afternoon. I hope you hear me. So I would like to say that it is really very helpful for collective bargaining to have some analysis of collective agreements. We have our own experience because in my federation, Metal Worker Federation, every year we collect collective agreements from company level. So every year we have data from approximately 500 collective agreements, and every year we make analysis of these collective agreements. So we have a lot of information about how many, in which percentage of collective agreement there is some provision about wage increase, or about holiday, about, I don't know, meal vouchers, and so on. So it is really very helpful. We also prepare for our bargainers on company level guidelines, which includes also a model of collective agreement. And these materials are based on these analyses. And we also provide our members courses, training courses about how to bargain collectively. And so we use these analyses also for this purpose. And so we have only data from metal workers sector. So it will be very, very fruitful for us to have information about collective agreement, especially from abroad. We have some information from our European Industrial Federation, but it is not very detailed information. We have some information about ongoing bargaining rounds and about the results. We also exchange good practices, good experience, but it would be very fruitful for us to have information about collective agreements, especially, for example, in multinational companies, because it is a big problem, because we think that the employers from multinational companies do not treat workers equally. There are big differences between collective agreements in Germany and in the Czech Republic, for example, in the same multinational company. So these aspects is very interesting for us.
Okay, thank you. Do you think it's also relevant to benchmark collective agreements from other sectors? It sounds like you all have a good knowledge of collective agreements in your own sectors. But for example, when negotiating in the metalworking sector, would it be of any benefit that you can check collective agreements concluded, for example, in the construction sector and also in other countries? Sorry, please unmute. Thank you.
I think it will be very helpful to see the results of collective bargaining in other sectors. We know only something from the database of sectoral collective agreements, so we can see the main features of clauses in, for example, textile sector, but it's only a sectoral agreement which is not so detailed. So it will be helpful and interesting to see which are the results of company collective agreements in other sectors.
Thank you. Meanwhile, we are getting some questions also in the chat box, which relate to the coverage of collective agreements. There are a certain part of the workforce is covered, and for them it is possibly relevant to benchmark the content of agreements in other countries. But still we have, especially in our region, a large part of the workforce which is not covered by collective agreements. Mr. Kártyás, you are an expert for collective bargaining in Hungary. I wonder whether you see any relevance of this database in trying to extend the bargaining coverage or trying to get inspirations for those who bargain to extend some provisions also for the workers that are not covered by these agreements.
Well, I have huge value of these databases, even from this aspect, because in Hungary, like in the States, we have a very low level of collective bargaining coverage. And I think every tool which could be used to raise this level is to be welcome. And one constraint to be overcome to have more collective bargaining agreements is Hungary. Spread information to the workers and to unions how to do this, what are the working conditions that might be included in collective agreements. There is a very interesting in Hungarian labor law because on one hand, the Hungarian labor code gives huge floor for collective agreements to regulate work and deviate from the nearly each and every main provision of the labor code. But on the other hand, in practice, collective agreements which make use of this legal possibility. So I think one of the main reasons of this is the lack of information. Still a lot of trade union officials and company leaders who are not aware of the information that collective bargaining is a very important in their hands and how to use it. So if we have such databases where examples of good practices, how parties already bargained over important working conditions in other sectors or in other companies, that could be very important as a role model follow for all these companies and unions.
Thank you. So it seems that we have jointly identified what is needed, so that there is a need for benchmarking, a need for looking out for best practices in other collective agreements, in other countries, other sectors. Now, going back to the question at the beginning, the access to these agreements. There is a huge problem in accessing them, especially when it comes to company agreements, since employers often consider these as some kind of internal intellectual property. I wonder whether you can recommend any ideas or suggestions how we could cope with this issue to feed the database with more company level collective agreements.
Well, I think from a legal point of view, I can totally understand if an employer is reluctant to share the content of a collective agreement because it is a business secret. So working bargained working conditions and especially wage levels are very sensitive data on the market. So I can understand if employers are not willing to share this information to the public. On the other hand, I also see a tendency where employers are really open up this and be very, and they want to comment on their working conditions, especially in those labor markets where there is a labor shortage. And Hungary is a very good example of this, at least the period before the COVID crisis. Because in Hungary we had a huge labor shortage, and for many employers it was very important to publicize it as much as they could, that they have very decent wages and decent working conditions. And to make their own collective agreement public and transparent was a very good way to act or appear in the labor market as a deep employer, where it is worth to go to work. So maybe this could be a tool to convince more and more employers to disclose their collective agreements, that this could be part of the employer branding. Like if you have a decent collective agreement, you can be proud of it and you can share it with as many workers or future workers as you can.
Thank you. We don't have any representatives of the employers on the panel, but I'm sure there are some among the participants. So I invite those employers among us to maybe share their views in the chat box on where they see benefits from an electronic database of collective agreement covering the whole EU or even beyond countries beyond the European Union, and whether this is indeed a possible strategy to show certain responsibility of the employer to share its best practices that have been embedded in their collective agreements. We have 2 minutes left for our Visegrad discussion. I wonder if any of the panelists would like to recommend how to further improve this database, or what are the next steps we should do as researchers in order to be helpful for you who work really in the field and you use this data in your everyday life? Please, whoever feels like responding is welcome to do so.
Have I unmuted myself successfully? Thank you. Now, we talk about this. I would like to start with a comparison. When now in the situation of COVID, people differentiate between having a vaccine and having a vaccination. And the same goes with our database. Having a database and having people use the database, allowing them to use the database, are two different things. And I thought about it, thinking about how good it would be to have a follow-up project with information and training directed first to leaders of our trade unions and maybe also employers who are in charge of training and education. I'm talking about trade unions who usually have such leaders and even the systems of education. And then have second step of such a project with trainings for trainers in particular countries. And then even preparing training modules for them. And then they can incorporate the information about the database, about how to use the database in their training program. Then every person, every single person that undergoes trade union training will have this information, because just posting the information on the website for me is not enough. Sometimes the information, falls through the cracks. That's all.
Thank you. That's a very interesting idea, and we will try to continue with this exercise. And you're right that it's not only about collecting the data, but making sure that those who negotiate collective agreements can use them. We received a question about the availability of this database. Yes, it is freely available, and there will be more information provided on the structure of this database and the findings from it in the remaining parts of this conference. So stay with us. There will be more to come, more videos, more presentations, more discussion. And now slowly we will see people from the breakout rooms coming back to this main room where we all join again the big conference, and we will continue. Thank you so far to the Vassygrad participants and to everyone who has listened to us. Please stay in this room, and soon you will listen to and see another video presentation and a speech by Professor Kea Tidens. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marta. Very interesting, very good. And it feels like that, especially this Vassygrad room was one of the, let's say, the most flexible and best. And that for a small part relates to the fact that the Italian and the Spanish, they had some problems with that rooms were closing and opening, as if there were other people, hosts and co-hosts, which we don't know. In the back end, we have been talking while you were discussing, and to be honest, we don't know where that's, who that was, what that was. But since we are, and now it comes, since we are from the transparency, we will never say that there's somebody who is listening to us and shouldn't listen, because we would like to have this in the open. But nevertheless, the Spanish and Italian room had some issues so far. Having issues means that we discussed already that we will invite them next week, same time, for a special discussion only in Spanish and only in Italian. We will do that with them, but it basically means that you as Vassygrad countries know that if you like to discuss more in depth this topic, knock on our door and we organize it, because we think it's important. We think it's absolutely important. And now it feels like room is filling up now with Spanish, with Italians, with Dutch. And well, a very short word to the people who were in the breakout rooms for the Netherlands, for Italy, and for Spain. We realized that you had some issues now and then. And to be honest, we don't know exactly why it is. We were not expecting this. The first thing we say, we offer next week, same time, a meeting again. So let's discuss that after the meeting, how to fix that. For now, we continue the program. The program will start with a very short video on what is happening in all these CBAs in the crucial countries. Niels will start the video. After the video, we will have the presentation of Kea Tidens.
During the past 2 years, 602 collective agreements have been analyzed. But how do they compare to each other? While 10 different topics have been identified, this video focuses on 9 of them. Wages, the 10th topic, will be discussed separately in a different context. Working hours and leaves are covered most often in the analyzed collective agreements. Health and safety and work-family arrangements are the second most covered topics. Job security, training, sickness and disability, and social security and pensions are covered less often. Job descriptions and gender equality are covered the least in the analyzed agreements. On average, collective agreements in the manufacturing industry cover 90% of all 9 topics. Agreements for construction workers cover 88% of the 9 topics. In the public sector, 81% of the 9 topics appear in the agreements. And in the agreements in the commerce industry, 79% cover the 9 topics. In France, almost all the collective agreements cover all 9 topics. In Italy, Spain and 3 other countries, more than 90% of the agreements include all 9 topics. In the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Poland and 4 other countries, all 9 topics are covered in 75 to 90% of the cases. In Belgium, Hungary, Slovakia and 9 other countries, 45 to 70% of the agreements include all topics. In Turkey and the United Kingdom, around 40% cover all topics. Finally, in Greece, 25% of the agreements include clauses on all 9 topics. Curious to see all the agreements for yourself? Check out Wage Indicator's collective agreement database.
Thank you, Niels, for this video. Now we have Prof. Keir Tijdens. Keir Tijdens is from University of Amsterdam and now more and more from Wage Indicator Foundation as well. And Keir is, by the way, the person who has been designing the collective agreement database. So she is reasonable in the know of systems and systems. Welcome, Keir. Welcome, take the floor, and Niels will set your presentation, your PowerPoint. So good luck. Where are you? And make sure we can hear you.
Yes, welcome everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, my name is Keir Tijdens. I'm from Wage Indicator Foundation and previously I was from the University of Amsterdam, and I've been involved in quite a number of social dialogue projects. And so my slides are about the collective agreements database that we have developed for this project. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. As the video already said, we have 10 topics in the database. That is to say, we code the text of the collective agreements, and we do so topic by topic. So that means we first detect whether there's, for example, any clause on health and safety. And if there are such clauses, then subsequent questions in the coding scheme pop up to ask for details about health and safety clauses or any other topic. So that is how basically the coding scheme for the collective bargaining agreements works. And altogether, we code more than 700 different items from the collective agreements. In addition, we do not only code the text, but we also annotate the text. So we know which part of the CBA text contains that particular clause that is coded. So from the coded text, we make a statistical database, basically an Excel file that can be accessed by statistical programs, and then we can do analysis. And what we see is that across countries, the variation of topics agreed is much larger than across industries. So within countries, industries are very similar in the number of topics that they agree. As the video already said, most CBAs include clauses about working hours and leave, because that is one of the key issues of CBAs, but not so in Turkey and the United Kingdom. Obviously, working hours and leaves are arranged in other settings than in collective agreements in these two countries. And that is what we see more often. In some countries, the legal setting is such that there's no need to agree an additional clause in the collective agreement. In other countries, this is not the case. So in 6 countries, all CBAs include clauses about sickness and disability, but none does so in Greece. In Greece, anyhow, the collective agreements are a bit poor, I would say. They cover few items, whereas in France, the CBAs cover almost all topics. In Greece, they hardly cover any topics. So basically, that is almost a kind of empty agreement. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, divided bargaining agenda. We looked at the difference between single employer and multi-employer bargaining. So our database, so the 600 collective agreements, half of them are single employer and half of them are multi-employer bargaining, but there's large variation across countries. So the presence of multi-employer bargaining agreements vary a lot across countries. There are countries that are predominantly single employer, and there are other countries who have predominantly multi-employer agreements. And that's not surprisingly, that's what we know from other sources as well. The topics agreed in both types are rather similar, though wages and social security and pensions are more often agreed in multi-employer bargaining compared to single employer bargaining. And social security and pensions are often combined with topics about job descriptions, health and safety, and sickness and disability. So there is a kind of clustering of topics that is more, that belong to each other. And there are other topics that do not occur jointly with other clauses. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, we also looked at transnational company agreements. We coded 40 transnational company agreements. Those are agreements that are concluded at the level of the European Union or at the level of at least several countries. And they are signed by the employers associations, by the companies who have really settlements in several countries. So 20 of the 40 are concluded in manufacturing, 1/3 in commerce, and the rest in construction. We did not come across any transnational company agreement in the public sector. Most TCAs are signed by 5 global unions, and a minority is signed with European Works Councils. And it was surprising that gender equality and training topics are the most addressed topics in transnational company agreements. The other topics are far less often addressed. And if there is, for example, if there is a clause about wages, for example, in a transnational company agreement, this clause says that the company will act according to the statutory minimum wage in the country. So that is more the kind of clauses that you will come across in transnational company agreements. For two transnational company agreements, we could compare what the establishments of the transnational company in several countries did, what they conclude. And then it turns out that the transnational company agreement has far fewer topics than the collective agreements in the respective countries. And they are very focused on a few items that are really agreed in transnational company agreements. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, is it feasible to make a European-wide data collection of collective agreements? So far, there is no such thing. So basically, whereas the theory assumes that wages and working hours are set in collective bargaining, in the European Union and in the wider Europe, we don't know what is agreed across Europe. So can there be any coding system thought of that we can code collective bargaining agreements across Europe? Well, more than half of the countries in the European Union have a repository of binding collective bargaining agreements. And almost all of them post these agreements online, either as full text or as a PDF, or some only present the metadata, so the data, the name of the collective agreement and the signatory parties. Some repositories extract the headings from the collective agreement that they register. Some extract in an automatic way information about the content. And we think that it is doable to really set up a European-wide data collection, because 21 of the 27 EU countries have less than 1,000 collective agreements. That means that in terms of the volume of to be coded collective agreements, that seems doable. And as we have proven in our CBA database for this project, it is feasible to code collective agreements in whatever language it is, to make them comparable, to extract knowledge from the collective agreements across European countries. And it shows you exactly how collective bargaining across European countries develops. So that is basically what I would like to say. Can I have the next slide, please?
Let's try and be a bit short.
Yeah, I think it's the last one.
This was the last one already.
Very good.
Yeah, go ahead.
And,
okay.
Thanks a million.
Thank you.
And, thank you. Thank you, Kea. Thank you, Jana, for explaining. Thank you, people in the Dutch room, in the Spanish and in the Italian room, and the Vassygrad room for explaining all what relates to this project. We come to the end, let's say the last panel, and the panel, well, last panel, but the panel which is on European collective agreements. Within this panel, we have Jana Besamuska. The panel is, by the way, in English and translated, as you know, in all the countries you wish to listen to. Then in the panel, we have Laurens Harteveld. I see Laurens already from AWVN, so Dutch employers. And we have Isabel Bart. I see Isabel as well. So you three, and Carles, where's Carles from CCOO? Because I know he had an issue with his laptop, and Carles is there now. I see him.
He's here.
Voila. So we have three people and Jana. And since we took a bit more time because of, well, the breakout issues, I would say the breakout transparency, Jana, I suggest you go for 25 minutes max.
Absolutely. I think
like short, maybe even shorter, so be very snappy. I know that there is a big discussion in Europe about wages and collective agreements and minimum wages, and you can tackle it. For sure, you can also tackle it with Isabel, I'm sure. So,
absolutely. Thank you, Pauline. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So thank you all for sticking around. I think we've seen a lot of information already here in the plenary about all of the topics covered in collective agreements, all of the differences across countries. And most of you have also spent some time in breakout rooms, taking a closer look at specific countries. And so what we'd really like to do in this panel, ask three experts to basically comment on this and tell us a little bit, are you surprised by these findings? Do you think, are we finding a lot of differences? Did you expect those kind of differences? And how do you look at this database? And I would like to start by giving the floor to Isabelle Barth. And she is responsible for collective bargaining and social policy in industrial Europe. Please, Isabelle, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thank you for organizing a very interesting event. We at Industrial Europe consider bargaining as our core business. I mean, we're representing industrial workers across Europe. And well, to answer your question, I'm not really surprised about these differences. I mean, we know that across Europe, we have very different system. We have different union density, different level of collective bargaining. I mean, some countries you bargain at sectoral level, you bargain at company level in others. But also you have differences in capacity to take industrial action or to fight for good agreement. So, and also the priorities of the trade union are different. But equally important, these differences, they also reflect different political choices on the role of social dialogue and collective bargaining in regulating the economy and the society as a whole. I mean, we don't have any Nordic countries represented, but we know that in these countries, social dialogue and collective bargaining play a central role, thanks to hard-won social battles that took place a long time ago. In Sweden, for instance, you have an obligation to negotiate, but in other countries, like we've heard before, the government do not take any responsibility in supporting collective bargaining, and employers even refuse to sit at the sector level to negotiate. And we know also that in other countries, Romania, for instance, collective bargaining, well-functioning collective bargaining, have been totally dismantled because or due to the intervention of EU institution and Troika. So, I mean, you have actually practice, but also you have some clear political direction that have created the situation where we are, irrespective of the fact that the treaty, actually, the European treaty, is clearly aimed at promoting social dialogue in Europe.
Thank you very much for this quick introductory remark. It's absolutely inspiring to hear what you have to say about this, and also what you're saying about Romania just rings home to me very, very much, since I've looked at pay scales in the last couple of months, and looking at Romanian agreements, I have to say I couldn't find wage floors, I couldn't find pay scales, I couldn't find references to minimum wages. It's like these agreements just don't talk about wages at all. Next up, I would like to invite Carlos Catala Piñol from the Comisiones Obreras from Spain to take the floor. He is a member of different European social dialogue groups and a lawyer at Comisiones Obreros. He has to leave in a couple of minutes, so Laurens, if that's okay with you, you'll be third here. Carlos, please go ahead.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes. Bueno, estoy en representación de mi sindicato, la primera organización sindical española, Comisiones Obreras, y en concreto yo formo parte del equipo internacional de la Federación de Servicios. Bueno, yo tengo que decir que la intervención que acaba de hacer la señora Isabel Bartés es muy adecuada y yo creo que resume muy bien en muy poco tiempo la cantidad de cosas que se pueden llegar a decir sobre la negociación colectiva en Europa. A mí, yo realmente felicito a los organizadores, a ti, Jana, a Pauline y a todos los panelistas de los diferentes países, en mi caso concreto, Dani y Gabriele, por haber sido capaces de sintetizar en solo 1 hora y media cuestiones que son tremendamente complicadas, como muy bien nos acaba de contar Isabel Bartés. En Europa yo creo que hay del orden de 4 o 5 sistemas de relaciones laborales diferentes, como mínimo. Estamos hablando de los sistemas del norte de Europa, estamos hablando de los sistemas del centro de Europa, Alemania o Austria concreto, que a veces no tienen nada que ver con los del norte de Europa. Estamos hablando de los sistemas del sur de Europa, al que también deberíamos añadir en muchas cosas Bélgica, por ejemplo. Estamos hablando de los sistemas del este de Europa y estamos hablando de los sistemas clásicos británicos. Es muy complicado y con los temas sindicales nosotros nos encontramos también, a veces, desgraciadamente, con una falta de unidad, porque en la Confederación Europea de Sindicatos estamos organizadas más de 100 confederaciones europeas diferentes y además 10 federaciones internacionales. Y nosotros incluso como comisiones de servicios estamos presentes en 2 federaciones sindicales diferentes, en UNI por las cuestiones de banca, comercio, juego y sector tecnológico, y también EFAD por todo el tema del turismo. Es decir, imaginémonos la cantidad de situaciones complejas con las que nos podemos encontrar y nos encontramos. Pero yo quisiera hacer sobre todo un llamamiento importante a entender, primero de todo, que los sistemas de negociación colectiva son absolutamente diferentes, pero que para eso tenemos una Unión Europea, una Comisión Europea, y para eso tenemos una Confederación Europea de Sindicatos que tiene la obligación, en nombre nuestro, que para algo estamos integrados ahí dentro, de presionar a la Comisión Europea en favor de los intereses de los trabajadores y las trabajadoras de toda Europa. Es una vergüenza lo que está pasando en algunos países del este de Europa. Nosotros siempre estamos en acciones de solidaridad con nuestras compañeras y nuestros compañeros del este de Europa, porque precisamente el hecho de no tener un convenio colectivo o de no tener derecho a la negociación colectiva es algo absolutamente primordial y absolutamente fundamental. Estamos en pleno debate al mismo tiempo con nuestros compañeros de la Confederación Europea de Sindicatos en la Comisión Europea, precisamente en un momento en que estamos intentando tirar para adelante una directiva digna sobre salarios mínimos europeos, en la que ya hay bastante polémica por aquello de si es importante que haya una ley en cada país o si es más importante que el sistema de negociación colectiva prevalezca, etcétera, etcétera. Es importante que haya garantías para todos los sistemas de negociación colectiva europeos, por diferentes que sean, y garantizar sobre todo que los que tienen menos derecho tengan derecho como mínimo a una ley básica. En estos momentos estamos, vuelvo a decir, con nuestra Confederación Europea de Sindicatos presionando a la Comisión Europea para que esta directiva salga adelante. Yo creo que en los próximos meses probablemente tendremos novedades al respecto, y solo para no largarme mucho más y pediros perdón porque dentro de unos minutos tengo que conectarme a otro asunto, agradecer la iniciativa que estáis llevando a cabo y que estamos a vuestra entera disposición para lo que necesitéis. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And I know you have to leave, but before you do, can you perhaps tell us, and speaking maybe a little bit slower than you just did due to the translation. Can you tell us one thing that the rest of Europe can learn from Spain?
Ok, gracias. Bueno, se hace difícil responder qué pueden aprender los demás de España. Yo creo que lo que debemos intentar, llevar hacia adelante en la medida de lo posible es intentar tener un poco la mentalidad de trabajar en red. Intentar que mis sistemas no prevalezcan por encima de los demás, sino tener un poco la mentalidad europea de que por mucho que haya países que tienen una situación mucho mejor, puedan ser solidarios con el resto de Europa y de alguna manera quizá desde España trasladar esto, ¿no? Nuestro sistema de negociación colectiva es muy garantista, pero lo que ocurre muchas veces en España es que las garantías legales que tenemos en la negociación colectiva, muchas empresas no las cumplen. España es un país donde están instaladas todas las multinacionales más importantes del mundo, pero el sistema económico se basa en un 90% de pequeñas y medianas empresas. Y muchas veces es en la pequeña y mediana empresa, que a veces es empresa familiar también, estamos hablando de pequeñísimas empresas, es ahí donde las garantías mínimas de un convenio colectivo no se están cumpliendo. Yo estoy seguro que en otros países está ocurriendo exactamente lo mismo. Y gran parte de nuestra labor como sindicatos es estar intentando representar a la mayor parte de estos trabajadores para que esas condiciones se cumplan. Estamos muy acostumbrados a intentar llevar adelante un trabajo en red con las organizaciones empresariales más representativas para que ellos también presionen a su vez. Y a lo mejor este trabajo en red, es algo que sí podemos trasladar al resto de Europa. Pero bueno, lo estamos haciendo en las federaciones internacionales, en la Confederación Europea. Desde luego nosotros seguimos aprendiendo de los demás, pero es un poco aportar nuestra experiencia lo máximo posible. Eso es lo mínimo que puedo decir en estos momentos.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you for joining us today, both in the breakout rooms and just here in this panel. I would like to move to our last speaker, who is Laurens Harteveld, and he is policy advisor at the Dutch Employers Association, AVVN. Laurens, please go ahead.
Thank you. The question is, why are collective bargaining agreements so different across Europe? Well, I think the answer is that collective bargaining agreement is a reaction to the societal developments. And since we have different countries and different societies, then also there will be a lot of differences between collective bargaining agreements. But it's a pity that we don't know these differences yet. But because I just was in the breakout session and I learned a lot about collective labor agreements in other countries. So it's very interesting to have access to all collective labor agreements and to learn from each other. So next week I will certainly take a look at the bargaining agreements. But it's still it's a bit difficult because there is a big discussion within our organization. Should we provide all the information? Should we post the documents on the internet? Because if we do it, then we cannot give advice to our members, and we also need to pay our employees. So there is a tension in that way. But I think that if we don't do it, if we don't publish the documents about collective bargaining agreements, then other parties will do it. That's what you see already on the Dutch internet. So in order to be these organizations ahead, it's better that we publish them themselves. And what also helps is that we have a government of social affairs that publishes all the collective bargaining agreements, so the thick books. So our ministry is publishing all the documents on the internet of the big collective labor agreements, and our organization is publishing the agreements themselves, the thin documents, the changes, the outcome of bargaining. So in that way, you can have a full picture of what is happening in the Netherlands. And I would love to see the full picture of Europe in the future.
Thank you very much. I think you touch on a very interesting and a core issue here that we'd like to discuss with you. And that is, do you need this information? And I just heard you suggest yes. I would also like to invite everybody who is in the room here listening, if there's anything that you would like to add to this, is there something particular about these collective agreements that you'd like to know, please post it in the chat. And in the meantime, I will ask Isabella and Laurens to just, it's a very simple question actually. So if we have this collective bargaining agreement and you can just look up what is in which agreement in different countries, will that help your work? And if so, then how? If I could start with Isabel.
Thank you, Jana. Yes, definitely, it will help. And actually, we didn't really wait for this work to be done, although I'm sure it's going to be much more thorough than what we can do. Actually, as Alena pointed out, we have already a start of a database because we've been now for more than 20 years collecting information about collective bargaining developments in Europe, because this is essential when you want to try to coordinate collective bargaining throughout Europe, actually. So yes, definitely, this is very useful. And of course, wage is a key issue, working time, but also what we are doing now, we are collecting what we see the emerging topics, the agreement on telework, on surveillance at work, actually, because you have mentioned, we have looked at a number of topics, but the list is increasing all the time. The only caveat I'd like to bring into that discussion, and Pauline already touched upon it, is that, of course, this is very important for the trade union. Transparency is essential for the coordination. But what we wouldn't like to have is to see that this information is actually used by government actually to monitor wage development beyond what is necessary and actually go into the direction of the government trying to send signals that wages should go down or should go up, actually. And this is one of the concerns that we have with now the proposal on a directive for minimum wage. Actually, there is this idea of monitoring, and then we would like to see some clear limits about what is the role of the government or at least the Commission in that respect, and not interfering into what we call the autonomy of the social partners.
Thank you, Isabel. And obviously, I'm a fan of looking at wages. So let me then quickly ask you, from a database on collective bargaining agreements, what information would you need on wages or pay scales in collective agreements to be able to fully contribute to this discussion and to set out policy?
We would need basic economic information like inflation, like productivity increase, because these are the basic information that unions look at. And of course, if we can have beforehand the demands that the unions have, but then of course the result, because there is also a big discrepancy. And of course you have differences in countries where you have sector agreement. It's fairly easy, I would say, but in countries where you have only company agreement, that's of course it's much more complicated to have a good overview of wage development.
Thank you. Laurens.
Well, if there is the database accessible in the near future, then I would like to see how in other countries social partners make agreements about avoiding the men-woman pay gap. What are agreements? Maybe we can learn from such agreements, and also other topics of secondary labor conditions like education. in the Netherlands, we have a lot of agreements about education, but I think progress is lagging behind. So I'm curious if there are more other ways of formulating agreements that stimulate education, professional education.
Thank you very much, Laurens. And if anybody has examples of clauses in collective agreements stimulating this education that you would like to share, please also post that in the chat already. We are running out of time, so we're slowly going to close. I just want to ask one more person. Armanda, are you here? Because Isabel just mentioned something about clauses on telework. And I know that you've done something, you've done a lot of research on that for the Italian case. Can you maybe in just 1 or 2 sentences explain to us what a clause on telework looks like? What is a clause on telework?
And now we think that Armanda's still there. Where is Armanda? If not, then I don't hear her yet. No?
No, she's not here.
No.
Okay, that is a real pity. Then what I can say.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, then let me just close by saying, Isabel, that in the Italian agreement, I'm not sure if you were actually in the Italian session just now, you might have been, but if not, and anybody who wasn't in the Italian session, there actually is a large section on recent developments on telework in collective bargaining agreements there. If you want to look at all 9 topics and see which countries you might have to prioritize to look for different clauses like gender equality in the French case, look at the reports as they've been posted as well. We value all feedback that you have on these reports as well. And so if there's anything that you would like to find in particular, please let us know in the chat or let us know afterwards, because we'd like to make sure that you can access the kind of information that you need. Thank you very much. And to all of my speakers, thank you for everybody who's here. And I'd like to pass the word back to Pauline.
Well done. Nice. Then it's actually a wonder how we can touch upon all these issues in 1.5 hours and then even have these nice little technical problems. So it's pretty cool. So thanks for, let's say, all negotiators and researchers around the world, and especially in Europe, for this discussion. I would focus now on a more technical topic. And for that, we created a very small video to get everybody on board. And it's for sure not chasing you away, because we keep on speaking in English, and the translators from Ballad and Ballad will leave now. Well, they only, if they want to stay, then of course they can stay. But otherwise they leave. So this part is in English. We have a video first to explain a bit what it is, machine learning. And after that, we have a discussion. That discussion can take, if we take beer, wine, whatever food, we can continue for hours if we want. I would say it's a bit of freaky discussion about machine learning and how to get thousands or millions of documents in a system as fast as possible without reading, actually, because that's the whole thing, that you do it automatic. So negotiators make a collective agreement, ideally automatic, and the system is automatic and everything is automatic. That's our little dream. We will discuss that. We will discuss it with a couple of developers from our team, from other teams. Enjoy it. First, Niels, we get a small video.
During the Colbar project, hundreds of collective agreements have been analyzed thoroughly. For this, annotation is needed. Ideally, in the near future, annotation could be done automatically. This is why Wage Indicator is now looking into the possibilities of machine learning. Annotation is currently done by locating paragraphs of the collective agreements where particular questions are answered. These questions are related to specific labor rights. When locating such a paragraph, a researcher assigns it the unique code of the question. These unique codes are called binds. Using these binds, it is easy to analyze any collective agreement, as these binds group related paragraphs. There are several models that could be used for automating the annotation process, such as the relative frequency model, bag of words, universal sentence encoder, BERT, PAR2VEC. Although Wage Indicator is looking into all of these models, this video focuses on the relative frequency model. The relative frequency model identifies the most frequently occurring words unique to the various binds. The model then uses these words to assign binds to specific paragraphs. The 30 most frequent words for each bind are determined based on the related paragraphs. For example, maternity, childbirth, and employee. Next, the 100 most frequent words in the paragraphs without a bind are determined. Without a bind means all the remaining paragraphs in the collective agreement. One of these most frequent words from those remaining paragraphs could be, for example, the word employee. These words are then excluded from the 30 most frequent words identified per bind. Using the resulting lists of most frequently occurring words per bind, the relative frequency model must identify automatically in which paragraph the answer to a particular question is to be found, without a researcher having to read the full text. This would make the analysis of collective agreements more accurate and less time-consuming.
I was doing two things in the same time. Sorry for that. Well, by the way, all videos which you heard was they're made by our team, and the team is in this case Neil Peugen, Rogerio Jr., and the speaker is Dirk Drachtstra. It's our David Attenborough from the labor market, as we say that. So they fix all this, and Akash Botra is the technical person for the Zoom. At this moment, we are without all translators who were in the Kwakwa system. So they left us, and tell you, we are still with 99 people discussing the most difficult topic you could discuss with so many people. So let's try. I will try to moderate as far as it's needed and possible. Obviously, if we want, we also can start creating breakout rooms to discuss something about birds, especially in a breakout room, for instance. And for our talk now, we have Stefano Cecon, Daniela Cecon, and Huub Bauma. These three, they are very much in the know of machine learning and let's say long text of the collective agreements. And next to that, are there people in the room who would like to express that they know a hell of a lot on this topic as well? Then tell us and show your face, because then we're more among each other. I know that Gritis Wiggers at least knows some about it. His team knows more. Are there others who are very much in this technical field or not? No? Then we just start. Then I would like to start first with Daniela Cecon. Why with Daniela? Because she has been the database boss for years for the collective agreement databases, and so she should be in the know of the topic. Why do we need machine learning, Dani?
Okay, so I think, especially as there are so many people connected now, a bit of more background is needed. Well, of course, Kea already explained a bit how we do the annotation, and the video, although a bit short, gave a small explanation. But yeah, I would like to wrap up a bit. So to do that, I would like to share my screen. Okay. Let me see if it works. Okay. So in short, well, Pauline, you said in your first intervention, I think, that our database is global. So now this project is about Europe. So we talked about European collective agreements, but of course our database is much bigger than that. And actually it started in 2012 with agreements from other continents. We started in West Africa, then we moved to Latin America, and then only then we started in Europe. So currently the database contains actually more than what's written in my slide. I think we are now reaching the 1600 agreements and they come from more than 50 different countries and they are written in 28 different languages. As Kea was explaining, we annotate them by answering to around 250 questions. Of course, as Kea said, it depends on a few trigger questions. So if the trigger question, which is a general one, like are there clauses on gender and equality issues? Yes, then more questions appear, so more questions are answered. If the answer is no, then of course that part is skipped. And these questions relate to labor rights topics, so can be employment contracts, gender equality, etc. When answering to each of these questions, the annotators also select the clauses where they found the answer. This means that we end up with two datasets. One is a CSV with all the collective agreements texts in HTML format. And the other is a dataset with all the clauses. So this dataset contains the list of clauses, and to each clause a bind is assigned. So it means that that clause contains the answer to that question. Why do we have HTML? We get this question quite often. That's because we also publish these agreements and we want our users to be able to navigate through the text. So our annotators also need to assign titles, subtitles to the chapters and the articles of the agreements. There's also a preparatory phase to this because many agreements don't come in nice plain text. They sometimes are scanned text or pictures. So there's a preparatory work to get to an HTML. Okay, why do we need to do this machine learning work? Well, that's because annotating is quite a long process. Because we, as you can see, we deal with many different languages and we can't have one annotator per language. So often the annotators need to annotate texts in languages they don't speak. So that's another issue. So what we would like to do is make it easier for them, at least to spot the part of text where the answer can be found. So that's like the first phase. Of course, the best, as Pauline was hoping, was to have it annotated automatically so that the script also finds the answer to the question. Where we're not that far, but at least we're working on helping the annotators in making their life easier. This is a challenging task for us, well, not only for the languages, as I said, because the resources that are available online are often for the English language. So, and some languages are not very much represented online. So it's difficult to get ready-made stuff or vocabularies or things you need to do the machine learning. Secondly, the vocabulary is very specific. So this could be both an advantage and a disadvantage because sometimes, as the video was showing, there are words that are still specific, but they appear basically everywhere. So we need to find the really specific words for that specific question in a field that's already quite narrow. So that's the contracts, that's the labor contracts field. Third issue is that when well, when this system was created, the annotators were asked, as I said, to select the clauses. But a clause is not a predefined unit. It can be a sentence, it can be a line, it can be a word. So what we needed to do is to have a unit to work with. So by using these two data sets, we basically combined them. So that's already done. We did, of course, the usual text cleaning, tokenization, lemmatization, etc. And we split the text, so the CBA texts, into paragraphs, and then we tried to see which of these paragraphs were included in the selected clauses and which ones. And we could assign the bind, so the question, to each of the paragraphs of the already annotated agreements. And that's basically our final data set. It's a data set with cleaned paragraphs, and for each paragraph it has either 0 or 1, whether it answers the question or not. How to move to the next one?
Mm-hmm. Well, my main question, Dani, is actually, how do you get it faster? Huh? That's the
there are ways of doing it. Well, we had started with a very simple keyword finding system, but that didn't work. That was because, as I said, you have a word like employee, which is very specific, and it has a high percentage of appearance in every clause, but it doesn't help because then it's not specific enough for each clause. So the solution is to find one or maybe more models that work. And these are the 5 models we have in our list. We have the relative frequency model, which has been developed by Stefano, and we already have some results with it. The next one that we want to try, which is a similar model, so it's also quite simple and it's also based on word frequency, that's the bag of words model. Then we have the universal sentence encoder, which works in a completely different way, and that's the one Hoop is working on. And then we will try also BERT and Part2Vec. These are 2 other models. I think I can give the floor to Stefano to explain a bit the relative frequency model we are using.
But maybe before, let's check, because we still have 70 people in the room, whether they're still on level. Before we go to Stefano and Huub. Other questions already? So other questions still, or can you all follow and you love to be with us here to invent the super technique? If no questions, we go to Stefano.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's very specific, but that's how it was meant. So
no, but that is the.
I know. I see. We lost quite a.
No, but you. I think the good part is that you dare to have this in the open instead of with 2, 3 freaks, and you never know what these freaks will decide upon. So it's better to have it in the open. So Stefano, take the floor.
All right. Hi everyone. Thank you. Well, 70 people is still a lot of people. I hope people will have questions. Essentially, so as Daniela explained, I think the main task here was to try to recognize and characterize some of these paragraphs, and so distinguish which paragraphs talk about a certain subject from the others. Right? That's at the end of the day the task. The data set is great. We have a lot of training data in many different languages, and in machine learning, that's possibly the most important thing, right? Having the data. And so we're able, so the first idea was exactly to try to look at words, essentially like count the words in different paragraphs, right? So for example, if you're talking about, a paragraph is talking about violence, maybe we'll have certain words that mention either the word violence or some other words that are related to it. So first kind of the idea is to count which words happen more often there. But then, as Daniel was saying, that's not enough, right? So maybe there are other paragraphs that share some words. Probably the most common words would be like, end, or some other very common words like employee, like was mentioned in the video. So what we did, we basically calculated the frequency of words in any other paragraphs. and compare that to the frequency of words in the paragraphs of interest, right? So the model learns for each bind what are the words that are more common and are more different and unique to those paragraphs compared to the others. And it produces a score, right? So this score will give you, it's essentially an average of the number of counts that this word has for each word. And then we rank these words, and we remove from this ranking the words that rank high in any other paragraphs. So we are left with only the words that rank high and are present only in the paragraphs of interest. So at that point, we then test the model. So how do we test it? We take, this is a typical machine learning technique for testing models, where you split the data set in different parts, and you just ignore one part and you keep it for testing, and instead you train the model with the remaining, right? So essentially you're just simulating a real world environment where you only have a set for training and you're predicting on a completely new data set. That's what we did. We did a 10-fold validation, which means we split the data set in 10 parts, and we use 9 to train the model and test on the remaining 10% of the data. And the results are actually pretty good. In a lot of cases, I think in NLP, so natural language processing, what I find is that simple models tend to give actually good results at the beginning. So I always start with frequency models and things like this before moving into very complex models, which we still want to do, but this gives us a baseline. And the baseline for some of the binds is really good, like especially for binds that have a specific set of words attached to it. For example, I mentioned violence, or there's others like maternity and a few others that really seems to get very good results. I have, maybe this is a bit technical, I can show.
Before you go too technical, Stefano, as I'm sure we have to go back a bit, because
Yes.
there is a person who says, well, but for God's sake, are all these collective agreements translated to English, or how do you manage otherwise? Which means this question first needs to be answered before you continue, otherwise they have no clue what you talk about. Please explain.
Yes, I think Dani, obviously you can come in, but essentially we have many languages, right? So all these contracts come from different contracts from different languages, right? So we'll have a set of paragraphs in Italian, another set of paragraphs in English and other languages, but they all have the same bind, right? So they will all refer to the same violence clauses, right? So in a way, we have a bridge, which is the bind. The bind is translating in every language, and that allows us to create a model that looks at violence, but across all different languages. Also worth mentioning that some of the models that can be used, I'm talking about BERT, which we can talk about, or other models that are available, they do work with multiple languages. Some of them, they even work across languages. So,
Quickly check if Erland understands now. Erland, where are you? Is it now clear to you? Or do you say, how do these people manage without translating all these texts? Erland.
Yes, it is clear to me, and it is as I expected, that you cannot translate all of them into English, but of course searches will be a bit more challenging. You don't even have a brief resume, a brief summary of each agreement that highlights key issues. You only upload the complete text in Italian, Spanish, Czech, etc. I understand it would demand a lot of resources to provide it in English, but like I said,
that might be Danny. Danny?
No, you're mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the limit of this is actually that, in particular of the model that Stefano is talking about, is that you need a certain number of agreements in one language to do this type of work, because you need to train your system and of
I think we lost Danny.
Danny.
Not enough as a to train our model, but for that there are other models that don't even need a training set. They don't even need a minimum number of agreements to work. Translating, I don't think it's an option, because well, at Weight Indicator we want to provide the actual text to workers. So of course workers need to access their text in their own language. And also if you translate, you lose part of the legal meaning of the text. So, and well, as you said, it's a big effort, so we don't want to go into that.
So maybe on this level, we can say that the issue of that you have different, let's say that you have collective agreements in hundreds of languages. In the end, we also have them in Amharic. That's not an issue. The issue is now how to, I mean, that's an issue we solved more or less. How to come to the next level of going fast through all these piles of collective agreements and annotate them quick, understand them fast. Stefano, you were close to showing a solution, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was, yeah, so essentially, I think you already answered most of the question around the translation, but in terms of the results, maybe showing, I have a slide I can show to give you maybe a bit of understanding. This is some of the results, for example, for the bind of violence. So essentially the model is able to find the average, so the ranking of the top words, I think is 0.4 in the bind, in the paragraphs that have the bind, and it's much lower in the paragraph without the bind. So these words are essentially more the ones that are most common. This is for Italian language, but they're the ones that in the Italian language are most common among the paragraphs that are related to the violence bind, right? So these words, you would have a different set of words for another language, right? English, they will be different. You know, Hungarian, they will be different. But you still know that they all refer to violence. So in a way, you don't need to translate in order to find which paragraphs belong to this bind, because it's basically you're building a different model for each language, if that makes sense. And this is the result. So you can see that, okay, this is it's kind of, again, kind of a machine learning, I think, test results evaluation system. But essentially you have on the x-axis, you see the specificity, which is basically how many your model is getting wrong, how many paragraphs is getting wrong. So this is saying if you place yourself here, it's about 0.1 on the x-axis, which means that assuming you make a 10% mistake, so on 10 paragraphs, you're gonna say that one is related to violence, one is not. So you're only making one mistake, right? You get 80% sensitivity, which means you get 80% of those that actually do have that bind, you get them right. So basically the model is doing right 8 out of 10 times with a margin of 1 as an error. You know, which is a pretty good result if you consider that there's no manual work at this point, right? This is completely done automatically and, you know, very quickly on the data that is coming in, right? All you need is essentially a text.
And does it mean that the last 20% you still have to do it yourself? So you have to double check and control everything?
Yeah, so in this case means that 20%, you know, you either can lower the threshold, right? So you can get possibly more errors if you try to classify more, or I mean that's the gap we want to fill with the next models, right? So that's our baseline, and I think the challenge is getting the last 10 or 20%, right? That's often the matter in machine learning. You get very good at like 90%, and then to do the last 10%, actually takes, you know, a lot of research. So, well, you know, we're getting there. I think maybe, I don't know if we have time, because, you know, I'm conscious of time as well. Maybe Hub, you can talk a little bit about the universal sentence encoder, because I know that's a more advanced model in some way. This is kind of a classical approach, I would say, but, you know, natural language processing moved a lot and quickly, and it got now into the whole embeddings world. I don't know, Hub, if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Just a sec, we quickly have still a question for you, Stefano, and that is from Jana. She said that 20% mistakes, does that tend to be false positive or false negative?
Yeah, so you have 10% of false positives and 20% of essentially, well, you don't get them, right? So they're false negatives. Yeah.
Okay. Now,
sorry, wait, there is a question from about Turkish agreements. They're asking if one has got the CBA text in Word or PDF, how will you make use of it in your system? Well, we have quite, I think 25 Turkish agreements in the system currently. Well, as I said, well, if it comes in Word, that's the best, because to convert Word into HTML is really just it's very easy. PDF can be more difficult. We use an OCR software for to do text recognition, which is sometimes very much time consuming. I mean, it helps. It's not like retyping, but it still needs quite a lot of human check, because it depends on the quality of the text, basically. But yeah, of course we collect many agreements even in Europe that were not in nice Word text format.
Thank you. I still, if
the other questions actually.
Question, then we go to Huub, or you want?
There's another question there. How do you move to other topics and queries?
Yeah, nice question.
That's a good.
Can you pick it, Stefano?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think definitely considering semi-supervised or active learning. I think for people maybe are not familiar with machine learning and so on, there are other ways of training your models, right? One way is when you have some data is already annotated, like in our case where you have binds already linked to paragraphs. In other cases, you might not have that. So you can just maybe tag a few of them and then let the model kind of adapt itself and try to automatically self-tag the documents in a way. That's considered like semi-supervised. It's a bit difficult to explain, but basically, depending on what data you have available, right? Again, I think we're quite lucky to have a very good data set here to start from. But definitely, if you start moving to new topics and queries, and if there is no, there might be cases where maybe it's more difficult to get annotations quicker, I think we're going to definitely explore other techniques like semi-supervised or active learning. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Huub, please add. So Huub is our developer for the wage indicator. He has been a developer for the collective agreement database as well. And of course, he's keen to have a system which makes everything more automatic. Huub.
Yes, I'm not sure if everyone can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Put your mic a bit louder or go closer to the mic, and then all is fine.
Louder, okay. Let me check. And I hardly ever use this. I hardly ever talk to people.
Yeah, I thought you were against Zoom, isn't it? So,
yeah,
but sometimes it's good to talk.
Yes, I know. Let's see. Headset, microphone. Move it up. I'm not sure. Is this better?
Voila, much better.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to start off, this is the work that's been done so far. That's I think it's only for detecting or linking the paragraphs to a certain topic, like to a question, for example, like, is there any clause on maternity leave? Then yes, it can find the paragraph or identify that paragraph, but it doesn't really. And in this case, that question could probably be solved easily because it's a Boolean kind of question with a yes, no. Okay, so that's okay and doable. But then there are many sub-questions or subsequent questions on that as well. Like if so, then how many hours or what are the specifics? And that's not really. We haven't looked into that yet. So, and I think that's probably a lot of where a lot of time-consuming work goes in as well. So I'm not sure how close we are to getting the automatic encoding of the CBAs done, but I think identifying the correct paragraph for the part that you're annotating on or where you're working on would be helpful. Quite helpful probably, but then still a lot of human work is necessary at the moment, I think.
Oops, that's a bad message, isn't it?
Sorry. I think that's what I think, but maybe I'm wrong, and could be go.
But I hear that Stefano thinks you're more classical. There might be a time difference or a year difference. I think it's maybe a couple of years difference or so. Does it mean that Stefano want to have everything, let's say, self-learning, self-steering, without any human intervention, or?
I do. I would love to have everything done automatically, but I'm not doing the annotation, so I would go crazy. It's not my job, but I think Stefano also, his work is not really answering it's only helping to identify the paragraphs. It's not really answering the yes/no kind of questions, and the yes/nos are easy, but what if it's an exact answer in amount of hours? It would be more difficult.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot of models that we can. I think we're just in a way at the first stage. The way I see it, it's different phases. I think phase 1 is getting the right paragraph. Phase 2, which we haven't really looked at yet, but it's coming next, will be to actually help answer the questions, right? But I think the tools are there. I think they might not be perfect, but NLP is moving really fast. It's crazy to see. You cannot distinguish nowadays a text generated by a machine, by a human. Like I'm telling you because I've tried, and you can. And it's really, and a year ago even you would. So things are moving really fast in this field. And
you mean so in half a year time we don't or hardly need our coders anymore?
Well, I don't know how fast that will happen, and it's very complicated task.
And we have quite some coders in the room, so they of course they're listening very well. Then so, and Danny, going back to you, what do you learn of this? How can you make smart steps to have it better and faster? And faster is not for the fun of faster, of course, but it's to cater for more people, for more collective agreements, for more workers, for more trade unions, etc. So it has a purpose.
Well, I wanted to say that I've been a coder myself. And to be honest, when you have a Turkish agreement that you need to read many times, because each time you answer a question, maybe you have some keywords you translated with Google, and then you Control F the keyword and try to look for it in the text, and you have to do it many times. So having a tool that tells you, look for the answer in that paragraph, that's already quite helpful, I think, to speed up the annotation and make it even more precise, because annotators can also miss some of the answers.
Yeah, so it's a little helper. Actually.
Yes, well, it's a start.
Yeah,
of course.
And there is one question. Somebody who says, "Well, but is this any way possible with legal text?" What do you think? Is legal text so unique that it's not possible?
Well, I think it's related to what I said before, that it has a very specific language, which can be helpful, but it can also be a trap. Because and also it has its own rules so to understand what it means, it's not that immediate sometimes. Even for the coders who are speaking that language, sometimes we have this type of discussions within the team. What do you think it means? How do you think I should answer to this? So that's something a machine hardly can solve. So we need to, I think, take into account that there will always be a margin of error with machine learning, and probably human check will always be needed afterwards.
Yeah, and if I can add, what I meant here is that I think it's also very difficult hi, I'm Jana, I'm a coder myself too. And I feel like I'm attending some AA meeting. But yeah, so what I mean is, I think when I read through these texts, and imagine that Dutch collective agreement texts are often easily 100, 150 pages. So it's a large document you have to go through. And you'll find these clauses will basically say you'll have 3 different clauses, and one of them will say the standard working week is 36 hours, and the next one will say if it's the 3rd week of the month, the standard working hours will be 37 hours. And then there will be one, if you're under 18, the standard working week will be 32 hours. And I think it's these kind of exceptions would be very hard to code with natural language processing, I imagine, because you really need to get those identifying clauses there that will tell you whether this is the rule or the exception. And they might not be immediately after one another.
Well, if I can add, maybe on the model side, there's been a lot of successful models, especially on BERT, on fine tuning to specific language and jargons, right? So even in the legal, I think there's already a BERT version just for legal text. It's been done. It's all in English, obviously. Yeah, but like again, for example, it's all in English, so it's not it's not perfect, the scenario, but things are going that direction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So which means you said all the small issues Jana sees, they will be solved in a couple of months, basically.
Sometimes, as I said earlier, doing that small 1%, improvement over the baseline is kind of maybe very difficult. Sometimes you need a breakthrough, right? Sometimes breakthroughs happen in machine learning, right? And in NLP, but it's not always the case. I think we need to try it.
So, and together you, let's say Stefano, Huub, and Danny, did you had a breakthrough already? Or was it that you were just double checking different programs and see how far you could get?
I can tell a little bit on the stuff that I did.
Yeah.
Because I was just playing around, because I had I didn't really know that what this was going on with as I was working on Cobra for many years, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to look up in the text to try to find the paragraphs which belong to a certain question? And so I was looking around at neural networks, and then there's for example, TensorFlow, which is has got quite some attention lately. And then I looked at the encoder. I just dropped it in the chat, and which is, I think, it's done by Google. And so you can just it's multilingual, and you can just or you can what it basically does is it takes all the clauses in the CBA and indexes it. So it makes a multi-vector index. So it will tell you, for example, if you have a sentence or a paragraph on maternity leave, it will, let's visualize it. It will just have an arrow somewhere into space, like this is probably where this paragraph is. And so you'll have your whole CBA with all these different vectors, with all these arrows where they are pointing to. And then you can also encode the question, which, for example, the question, is there a clause on maternity leave? Then this will also point you into that same vector space. And then you can calculate the distance between those two, and you can find the nearest paragraphs, which will tell you something about this question. And this is what I was playing around with. I've not done a lot of work in it, but I'm just playing around with it. And I thought the results were quite amazing, to be honest, more than what I was expecting. I can let's see if I can share my screen and then go to it very quickly. Okay.
You embrace what Huub is telling, or you think it's old school? I can't see your face proper, so I'm not sure if you're happy with what Huub is explaining or not, Stefano.
Yeah.
Is the screen sharing working?
Yeah.
I can see.
Okay. So this is something which on Google you can program a little bit in it, and you can document at the same time, and there will be parts of code in between. It's called a code book, and so this is what I just copy paste somewhere, and I manipulated somewhat to have it look at Cobra, at the database. So it actually works at our acceptance Cobra, so it's like our test system, downloads all the texts and all the questions. And then in the end, it does the indexing, which take a few minutes. I just run it, so it just takes a few minutes for one CBA. And then, for example, I went through all the annotated clauses that we have, and then I tried to match and see how well I did. So I could actually test it. I just took one specific one. I think it was Spanish. I'm not sure. And then I did a dumb. I didn't do anything nice with graphs, but I just did a dumb check, see how well it did. So this will say, for example, the clause for equality monitoring, it found that paragraph in the second position. So it found multiple paragraphs, and then it said like, okay, the second paragraph I found was actually the same that was done by a human. So a human pointed at some other paragraph or word. For example, this one is number 7, then number 6, but you see a lot of them have a number 1 as well. So the severance number, tenure, severance number in position, maternity nursing breaks, identified the right one, and so you see a lot of them actually have 1. Some of them are really bad as well. So commuting allowance type position 19. So I don't know what I haven't really looked into it. I just did it and I thought it was good. So for example, I have a little bit of manual testing here as well. So I can do, is there a clause on pregnancy, and then I can run it, and then it will tell you, it will give you these 10 results on in the text. And I'm not good. I can't read Spanish, so have no idea if this is anything like that. So I'll just pick the first one, go to Google Translate, and I don't think I shared this one, and then it will actually tell you something about pregnancy, or you can just use your own word here as well.
Seems like a good one to me.
It knows all this. It knows all these different languages as well. Is there a clause on maternity leave? But you can also use Dutch. Is iets geschreven over? Oh. And same one, and well, now it will find protection a la maternidad, so it's probably even closer. But so you can see, you can just and this encoder, I use the Google one. It has 16 languages, so it's Arabic, Chinese, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Dutch, Polish, Portuguese, Spanish, Thai, Turkish, and Russian. So it doesn't cover all the European languages, unfortunately, but well, it was interesting. So let's see. Stop sharing.
So thanks. So, and Stefano, when you hear this, what do you think? Does it bring you a step further?
Well, yeah, I think this, well, Universal Sentence Encoder is great. I think it was a breakthrough, and it is a breakthrough in terms of considering context around words embedding. So it's a big step forward, I think. And come on, you can see how you can quickly manage multiple languages.
I've got a question for Huub. Does your model need a certain number of agreements in a certain language, or not at all? So it doesn't matter.
Not at all. No, okay. Doesn't matter.
So the model has been, imagine that model he's using has been trained before, right? This model has been built on big corpus of data, like say the whole of Wikipedia. I think in the case of Universal Sentence Encoder is Wikipedia and some other source. It's the whole of Wikipedia.
A lot of text. Yeah. So it knows.
When a text is trained, then that doesn't have to be a collective agreement, right?
Correct.
No, it can be any text. Yeah.
Any text, huh?
Yeah.
Let's ask others what they think, whether they have smart questions. And it's not that we do something freaky, because we still have 47 people who join us in this meeting, which is not too bad. Huh? So it means that quite some people are keen to understand what we're up to. And are there more questions? Kea? Yeah.
Basically, Huub, what you showed is if we have our coding scheme available in those 16 languages, would that be a good input for your model that you're now showing? Because basically then we have all the keywords that we want to use for the coding.
Stefano is using the keywords, right? You asked me, right? So
yeah, I'm asking Huub, what you just show for maternity leave or pregnancy or whatever.
Yeah.
Basically,
the thing is, sorry, go ahead.
If we have our coding scheme and we have all the keywords in our coding scheme, and we have the coding scheme translated or not even translated, we can squeeze it into your model.
Well, the thing is, the model is I'm using is already been there's been there's a huge process power has already been used to create the model. It's a neural network, so it's basically all. You can compare it by picking someone's brain who is multilingual, and you could just tell them, look at this CBA text, and then fire a question at that person and say and asking him, in what paragraph do you think this is happening? The answer to this question can be found, and then it will give you that paragraph. So so you can't train it any further. It's not. You just have to provide the text and the context and the question.
If we have the text, we have the text that has to be inputted in your system.
Yes, so we can already do that.
Yeah, we can do it. We can run what Hub showed. We can already do it. That's we don't need anything else, I think.
No.
Yeah, that's one of the things we want to do, right?
So this feels like a little breakthrough today.
Yeah, so I think the thing is that we need to test different models for. So you saw in Hub's result, there are some questions or some topics which were easily spotted, let's say, and some which were not. And it's the same with Stefano's model. So what we're trying to do now is to test different ways of doing the same thing or getting to the same result and see which one works better and maybe understand why it doesn't work for certain topics. So, and then after that, we can, I think, proceed in either picking a model or maybe combining more than one.
And do you need, let's say, other, because I know that Ministry of Social Affairs in the Netherlands, they are working, wasn't it that they were working with BERT? Because that's what I remember.
Yes.
And because I thought it was so funny that you have a program which is called BERT. So you let BERT doing the work. And so Gritis, is Gritis still there, or Nienke? How far are you, and do you want to join this group of people who discuss, let's say, becoming more automatic and have obsolete codes? Where is Nienke and Gritis? Are they still there? Or?
I think Steve left, but Daniela, my colleague, is more into this topic. Can you explain, Danielle?
Hi. Yeah. I think Sophia is here too. She is our coder, actually. But we started this as a startup in residence program. So we're working together with a startup, and Sophia is our from the startup, actually the coder, and we are more on the other side from the ministry perspective. So we're working together. Is Sophia still there?
I don't know.
I think she is.
So Daniela and Nienke, you don't dare to say it. Sophia. Kaprenko.
Yeah.
Aha. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I just posted my questions there because I think we are approaching a problem in a similar way. So I was just curious if there are any teams who try to use any type of pre-training, because normally the problem is that all these models that have been pre-trained already, they are built on Wikipedia data or some sort of comparable data. So it's not necessarily the language that one would see in labor agreements. But I was wondering if anyone has tried to do any or pre-train by the labor agreements, because these are small data sets usually. Like, right, we are talking about 700, I believe, in the Netherlands, more or less.
So Huub and Stefano, where is Stefano? I lost him.
Yeah, he just wrote that he dropped.
So then, but Huub?
Yeah, I was just too lazy to do any of that. I just had fun for an afternoon and played around with this neural network stuff, and but yeah, I'm using a pre-trained model, which is exactly the problem, or it could be a problem. It's very generic. It's also one of the. It might. I mean, it's not necessarily all bad, because having generic stuff is also pretty good if you have. It covers lots of grounds on all kinds of different kinds of CBA text. Not all text will be very. Will probably be written as specific in the same kind of, I don't know, vocabulary. So some of them might be more approachable for the common people to read them, I think, and some will be more or less very specific for all these. I don't know, different language almost. So so having it to learn on a specific set of, let's say, 700 CBAs might also give you the problem of being too specific. It's like, so you could overtrain your neural network or your other model you have. So then what the problem then could be is you get a new company that gets a new CBA in, and the model might work very poorly because it has a different technique or different person who wrote it, and it's using a different style, and so generic is sometimes much better than being very specific, especially if you have such a small amount of documents.
Sophia?
Okay, sorry, because I got an answer from my brother on WhatsApp.
Yeah,
So I passed your question, and he said he checked, but he couldn't find any. Well, and to be honest, having worked on collective agreements collection for years, I can totally understand why such texts are not available, because it's almost impossible, except for some countries, to find these texts online. So it's yeah, I understand why this doesn't exist, probably.
No, definitely. I think that my question was more like, let's say, if we take BERT or Dutch version of BERTje, of course, it would capture the generic language, and this is something that we would want either way. But we can also pre-train it. So we can also use a domain-specific collection to teach BERT a little bit more about labor agreements. I think the only problem that I would envision here is that the collection is relatively small, because also for pre-training or domain adaptation, researchers have been using thousands of documents. So slightly like bigger collections than labor agreements. We are still having it on our backlog to test and see what we will get. But I was just curious if anyone has already tested it in the past, because it would be interesting to.
So, and Sophia, would you like to team up with Dani, Stefano, and Huub, or do you have your own path?
We are currently working on a project together with Daniela. So that's for a Ministry of Social Affairs that is about to happen. And definitely we are happy to share the findings and have the conversation. So in that sense.
Yeah, we haven't started trying BERT yet, but I think it will be definitely good to keep in touch on how we are proceeding and how things are working in both groups. So.
Yeah, and do it in time, so not after a couple of years when it's let's say when it's the official report, because now you still can learn a lot from each other, I assume.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're especially welcome at our demo day. Then we can demonstrate what we've been up to so far. I think this is a nice moment, so you're welcome to join us. And I think, to be clear, I'm also named Daniela, and your coder as well. But did we already send you an invite? Otherwise, we will do that again.
We absolutely would love to. And I hope we learn from this discussion. Or is it only showing information? Or is it, do we make new steps in this discussion?
I think maybe we can also do a joint discussion afterwards. So first we have a more global program also with other startup in residence. And then we have maybe like this, a specific afternoon.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
I think would be good. Are there others in the room who say, well, this is new for me and I would like to join? Or are people only listening secretly? Or maybe they're just drinking beer and stay. I don't know. So let me know. Manola.
I'm sorry, but my English is no perfectly.
No problem. We have many people who can translate if needed. So just try.
I can translate, Manola, if you want.
Ma non ho chiaro cosa mi ha chiesto Armanda.
No, se vuoi dire qualcosa posso
No, io ho molto apprezzato, abbiamo avuto alcune difficoltà tecniche, avevo guardato Wage Indicator anni fa, prima che si facesse il progetto con il CNEL, e quindi mi ha fatto piacere inserire i nostri contratti dentro questa piattaforma. Purtroppo è vero, come avete detto anche voi, che non è semplice collegare i contratti, le diversità dei paesi, cioè ci sono delle particolarità nei singoli paesi che fanno fatica a trovare spazio nella piattaforma.
Yes, so she said she's Manola Cavanilli, a trade unionist of CGL, and she's also at CNEL. She appreciates a lot the work of Wage Indicator, and she agrees that actually it's very difficult to combine diversity, heterogeneity among countries with respect to collective bargaining. So the effort that Wage Indicator does in getting a uniform, let's say, but at the same time heterogeneous database on collective agreement is very important. If I can add,
è molto importante, cioè riuscire a conoscere i trattamenti di salario e normativi di tanti paesi, quindi il lavoro prezioso che fanno è molto importante.
From a trade union perspective, it's very important to get this comparable data because it's not so evident to have them. So also from trade union perspective is important. May I also add something that I wrote in the chat, but maybe was lost, about the discussion of, let's say, the impact of technology on human work. I think that machine learning and what they showed us is very promising in the sense that it can actually upskill the work of the coder, because if you are able to select in a very fast way and without many mistakes, let's say, the text, then as coder, as an analyst, you can really deep in the analysis, get to the more complex also cases where nuances are difficult to grasp at the beginning, and refine your analysis in detail. So I think that actually is a very powerful tool, and I don't see it in opposition to the human work, as it just has the possibility of enlarging the things that you can do and get to the final result, that is to have data, good data that on which you can work on. So thanks for all the work you are doing on this.
Posso dire una cosa su questo? Il lavoro delle macchine dovrà aiutare a lavorare meglio e meno i lavoratori, cioè c'è una grande possibilità di riduzione dell'orario di lavoro se usiamo bene le tecnologie, che potranno fare alcune cose molto ripetitive e che prendono tempo. Pensiamo ai notai, agli avvocati che devono leggere tante leggi, devono cercare le sentenze, queste cose alla fine le potranno fare le macchine.
Armanda or Dani?
Yeah, so she said that machine can help to improve and improve the quality of the work of people, and also reduce the working hours. That there is also that we should also put in the debate. It's not this case, but in general, no, the idea that with the help of machine you can free working time, you can reduce working time, and help workers to work better. And
yeah, thank you, because on this way you bring our work in more, let's say, in a broader perspective. And I would say we have a last round. If there is still somebody who says, I want to say something about the machine learning and how to be smarter, feeding bird or any other project or program to get more CBAs quicker in the system, understand them faster, be better able to compare them all over the world, then come up now. Otherwise, we close the meeting today. You can be sure that all information as we have it now, we will share that with you the coming days on the agenda and on the project page of Colbar, but we will send you messages about that. On top, don't forget, we have a questionnaire in which you can complete whether you were happy or not on this meeting, or whether you think it was good. Obviously, you understand that we need that type of information for EU projects. That's part of it. I would invite all people who are close to machine learning to come back, let's say in the coming couple of days, so to have a new meeting together and to make it next level and say, come on, we're close to new solutions, sit together and fix it. So don't talk only, but fix it. So I will take the initiative to have the machine learners together. If one of you want to be part of it, then just send a message in the chat box here that you want to be part of the machine learning group who comes together to make a new stuff. That's about machine learning. About all the reports which we produced for this project, they are in draft at the project page at this moment, and we will share the project page. We did it in the chat box, but we'll do it in an email another time. If there are issues, of if you say, my God, you didn't understand anything about our Spanish collective agreements, then please tell it, or about the Dutch one or whatever, because these drafts are there to get and to be improved and then to be finalized. And as you know, we have visuals, where you can quickly find all CBAs, know where they are, compare them, be much smarter than than a half a year ago, than a year ago, at least, and 6 years on. Or do you remember, Danny, when we were in Togo? I think that was 2011 when we started this collective agreement database. So now we are much further in what we can do, how we can do it. By the way, the database is still called Cobra, and that looks like it's an IT language, but it's just the snake Cobra, and that is because we think that collective agreements very often are generated in a situation where it's not easy between a lot of snakes in a big nest. So that's why we called it Cobra. But it looks like it's it's an IT name. So this is it for now. Thanks. I would say thanks, Akash and Niels, for all the work you did to make it happen. Thanks all panelists, presenters who are still here to make it happen. And I think it's amazing that after a couple of hours, so we're still with 30 people now, that although it feels like it's a super boring, stupid topic, collective agreements, apparently it's not. And because it brings, let's say, power to workers, as Rogeria would say. Thanks, looks cool. And see our present soon in your mailbox. It's a cool present which we made for you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
The survey.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao, Armanda.
Ciao.
And thanks, Manola. So Danny and Karen, so we stay and then we can quickly gossip. And where is Akash and Niels? Is Niels still there? Yes.
Yeah, Niels and I are still there.
Yeah.
And thank you, Hoop. Oh, he's gone.
And Kazimir. Kazimir is from Poland, or where are you from?
From Poland, of course.
And you liked it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Voila. Thanks a lot. Then, and thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Danuta. And I hope you didn't smoke too much.
No, I didn't. I was just feeding my bedridden mother. That's why I was out for such a long time. But I wanted to make one comment that I didn't have time or opportunity to make before about machine translations. As I do a lot of translations myself, I use DeepL. And I must say that legal documents are much better translated than regular language or reports or anything, because the machine system doesn't deal well with unexpected. but legal parlance is there. Is expected. And like every translation, it does need a control of the human mind because it's not perfect. But it's much better. I mean, legal documents are much better translated through the, maybe not Google translation, but people definitely.
Mm-hmm. Danny, can you pick that up? That is good.
Yeah.
That is.
Well, that's because it's very specific, and as she said, it's not unexpected. So it's it's true.
And the structure of the document is there because whether it's British or Polish, certain phrases and the structure is already there. So it's really, you can rely on legal documents translated while other documents not necessarily so.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danuta. And here we still have there Ricardo, Paulina. Well, simple question. Do you think it was worth it to do it good or to do it like this? Yeah, interesting enough. This is really evaluation questions because now we had a meeting which started at 2 and 3.5 hours. And well, now we still have 13 people. So it's quite a